Okay, I'm going to continue reading uh, Devil in Massachusetts. And I've actually been hanging out with some people from Massachusetts in Discord. Um, so yeah, stop at chapter 13, Damned for the Glory of God. One of the first cases tried by the court when it resumed its setting late in June was that of Rebecca Nurse, a journey headed by Thomas Fisk heard the evidence, retired to Corin's house to deliberate, and returned to court with the verdict not guilty. Obviously, these good men and true had read every word of the minister's advice to the judges and had taken it to heart. In court, for instance, the Putmans had testified that Rebecca had murdered 6 children, and Sarah Holton that she had killed her husband for letting his hogs and Sarah Holden that she had killed her husband for letting his hogs into her garden. But all this was spectral evidence. The jury read over again the minister's recommendations of exquisite caution and the convincing on something more considerable than the accused persons being represented by a, a spectrum to the afflicted, and decided that all this testimony could be disregarded. The ministers had urged an exceeding tenderness towards persons formerly of an unblemished reputation. That was Rebecca's. What was Rebecca's reputation? The jury had before it a petition signed by more than a score of respectable citizens of Salem village, attesting to Rebecca's uptight and unwitchlike character, her her pity, to the extraordinary care she had lavished on the Christian upbringing of her children. In addition, they had evidence of their own eyes. Uh, they had watched Rebecca on the stand and could well believe that this gentlewoman, so patient in her adversity, so steadfast in her uh, pro- protestations of innocence, had indeed never afflicted a child, no, never in her life. There was one other significant testimony, as many of Rebecca's children could manage to attend court keep a vigilant eye on the conduct of the accusers. Sarah Nurse, greatly daring to leave her mother, came forward with a disposition. I saw Goody Bibber pull pins out of her clothes and held them between her fingers and clasped her hands around her knees, and then she cried out and said, Goody Nurse pinched her. This I can testify. Having deliberated on all these matters, the jury had no great difficulty coming to an agreement. They filed back into court and gave their verdict not guilty. They were at this stage an inexperienced jury, at least as regards to the witchcraft. The trials were held in Salem town instead of in the village, and probably few of these men had seen the the the, tum- the tumult that had attended some of the examinations. Though the girl had cried out the examination, during the trial of Bridget Bishop, nothing very sensational happened then. There had been nothing in their experience to prepare them for what happened now. Before their eyes, the courtroom became a madhouse. Out of the throats of the girls issued a howling and roaring that was both more or less than human. Their bodies jerked and snapped in an unearthly uh, choreography of their convulsions. Some of the newer judges, as inexperienced as the jury in the ways of Bedlam, stared at them and at each other, to all of them with one probable exception, since uh, Saltonstall was still of the court at this trial. The verdict was an unexpected and improper, as it seemed to the girls, uh, though the tumult one was heard to express his displeasure, and another getting up to leave the, the bench to say that he would have a prisoner uh, indicted anew. Only Chief Justice Stoughton, man of granite, was untouched by this disorder. He sat a fine figure of composure, his hair silver under his black skull cap, and fixed his dark eyes on the spokesman, Thomas Fisk. I will not impose on the jury, said Stoughton, and at his calm, judicial tone, the din subsided somewhat. But I must ask you if you consider one statement made by the prisoner when Deliverance Hobbs was brought into the court to testify. The prisoner, turning her head, said, "What do you bring her? What do you bring her? She is one of us. Has the jury weighed the implications of this statement?" Fisk, faltering before the steady eye of the Chief Justice, troubled by the clamor of the girls, which was rising again, like an ill wind, found that for the life of me he could not remember, neither when he returned to the consultation to the consultation could the jury. Some members had not even heard the original statement. Others could not agree on just what form the words had taken, much less they meant. There was nothing to do but send Fisk back to court to ask Rebecca to repeat and explain herself. Rebecca had been left in peace for some time now, relaxing her anxious straining to hear, relaxing her anxious straining to hear. She was at rest, staring fixedly ahead of her. In some ways, deafness was a blessed uh, providence. The racket of the girls was to her only confused buzzing. In her abstraction, she did not mark the man who stopped before her. So many came and went, and something heard of something, and full of grief, As she explained afterward, she did not know that he had spoken to her. Fisk waited in embarrassed uncertainty. No one came to his assistance. No court official intervened to call Rebecca from her brown study. Probably because, given the disorder of the courtroom, no one grasped the situation. At close range, Fisk was discovering that there was indeed something unearthly, someone witch-like, something witch-like about this woman. Their glassy stare of her eyes passed through him unseeing. Her mouth worked as if in prayer, but to whom? He returned at last to the jury, his question unanswered. The jury weighed the implications of the innocent. There were two incriminating factors. One of them, the renewed affliction of the girls long ago. Hawthorne and Corwin had discovered as a kind of unwritten rule of evidence that the girls could be used as a kind of judiciary barometer. Let any disagree of false pity creep into the administration of justice, and the girls were tormented. But Havoc, their verdict, uh, had wrought had brought the jurymen. Uh, sorry, what havoc their verdict had wrought, the jurymen could see for themselves. Then there was Rebecca's silence at such a moment, on such a point. They bowed before the acuity of justice. Sultan, so much more learned than any poor juryman. Obviously, Rebecca's one of us, in reference to Goody Hobbs, and had been an involuntary admission of guilt. It was an allusion to the witches' Sabbaths in the deliverance, uh, in which deliverance had participated with her before she repented. Rebecca had seen her there, and now dared not deny it. When the jury came back into court, verdict. Ex- they brought the verdict expected of them, guilty. Rebecca had no less than three pastors who should have known her pity, her charity, her deafness. How often had how often had not Paris seen the old woman leaning forward in meeting, cupping her ear to catch the word of God? Technically, of course, Paris was not really her pastor, since though she regularly attended his service, she had never had her dismission from the First Church of Salem. The responsibility for her soul's warfare accordingly lay with John Higginson and Nicholas Noyes. The former should have remembered Rebecca, but he was far gone in years and infirmities, had of late had of late left pastoral details to his second in command, Noyes, the latter, called to Salem town 3 years after the Noyes had moved to the village, hardly knew the woman. In fact, his acquaintance with her was almost wholly because of his uh, sedulous attendance at the examinations and trials. He must have asked Paris for further detail, but if he expected thereby to wear extenuating circumstances, he was expecting bread from stone. Not not once had Paris questioned the guilty of any number of his parish, no matter what his past record. Once the girls had accused him, then they did those shepherds of souls ministers to this lost sheep and her affliction. They held her into meeting and had her publicly excommunicated. Noyes lost no time in carrying out this wholesome measure. The ceremony took place on the first Sabbath after the trial. At the afternoon meeting on 3 July, the fact that the prisoner had collapsed after the trial was not allowed to make any difference. Rebecca, unable to walk, was carried from Salem prison in a chair, and that chair sat down in the broad aisles of the great and spacious meeting house, so lately desecrated by the demon of Bridget Bishop. Then, not only Noyes, but his senior pastor, old John Higgins, mounted the pulpit. The two deacons and ruling elders took their seats before them. The auditorium was full. The congregation sat in deathly hush, for this was a deathly occasion. The reading of the sentence was left to Noyes, and the congregation stuttered under its impact. Unearth, there was something unearthly, something intolerable in the scene. It was if it was as if Michael Wigglesworth, Day of Doom, were being exacted not in the next world, but here in this plain and decent meeting house. Before their eyes, one of them was being judged, and not merely to the gallows, but to eternal damnation. God was relieved of any necessary for passing on the case of the latter judgment. The visible congregation of God had respectfully taken over his function. The woman was damned here and now. Rebecca alone heard nothing. Again, her deafness was merciful. Her trembling hands clutched at the arms of her chair, and before her strength had altogether given away, silent men carried her back to prison. But though the church had renounced her, her children had not. They would not accept her sentence, either temporal or spiritual. Sons and son-in-laws dropped their work on the farm and made for Boston, where Phipps was briefly in residence. And though they were simple folk without friends of great estate to help them, they gained an audience. Before them, they laid the dossier they had been collecting, the testimony of a character that the neighbors had signed. Fiska's explanation of why the jury had revised the original verdict, Rebecca's explanation of why she had not answered an unheard question, and of what her remark had meant, knowing Deliverance Hobbs as a fellow prisoner, and she had challenged her right to testify. They brought. Wait, is that it? Okay. They brought also an appeal from Rebecca herself. The jury of women had found a witch mark on her. Rebecca asked that qualified midwives be allowed to examine the mark on the grounds that It was an injury of childbirth, such as any woman might bear, and any midwife would recognize. For all his eminence, Phipps was as simple as heart as most Salem villagers. He gladly would he have kept himself clear from the whole affair. What did the plain ship's carpenter, with no pretensions of learning, know of such things as these? But he could not deny himself to people so honest and so distressed. And when he heard their story and saw the evidence they bore with them, he could not deny the plausibility of their claims. So he signed a rep- reprieve, reprieve for Rebecca Nurse. But if Phipps could not deny himself to the friends of the prisoner, neither could he deny himself to the enemies who were honest, distressed, and who brought evidence with them, and who, moreover, had the backing of some of the great ones of Massachusetts. They also brought frightening news that the very moment the governor's hand had been put to the reprieve, Rebecca's devil had been unleashed and had gone into the girls again. Some of them were dying. Was it really the will of the governor that an old proved criminal be kept alive at the cost of the lives of young and innocent girls? It was not. Governor Phipps recalled his reprieve and fled again to the place to the peace of the Indian wars in the north. It was at this time that Paris began to note an unseemly falling away in attendance at meeting on the part of the nurse family. But the closer the day, but the closer the day of the execution, the more conspicuous the absence of the sons and daughters of Rebecca, who had never stood in greater need of the church and its consolations. They spoke. He spoke rather sharply on the subject from the pulpit, but even this did little good. What if the children of Rebecca had came at all? They did not sit at his feet quite as they had of old. There was an indefinable difference, something in their eyes had that even this insensitive man found difficult to meet. To the members of the nurse clan was being revealed. To the members of the nurse clan was being revealed in these days a new concept of the strategy of the devil. So having a family is a strategy of the devil. Those who said that his assault was directed against the churches had told only half the truth. They now knew that the devil had not merely attacked the meeting houses; he had taken them. It was only he who looked out the for the hard eyes of those black-coated ministers who, forgetful for every biblical injunction toward charity, uh, preach only to preach only the doctrine of vengeance to their lost and desolate flock. They would never forgive the likes of Noyes and Perez. The Bible, which conceals forgiveness for men, does not suggest it for devils. A devil can only be cast out. The kinsmen of Rebecca did not talk this way, of course, not publicly, perhaps not even privately. There was nothing they could do now but bide their time and give what comfort they were permitted to give to that poor saint, their matriarch. As for Rebecca, a Puritan born and bred, unshakable in her faith for the glory of God, she would even suffer damnation. But ever again, as she prayed, uh, as she bent over uh, posturally in uh, in testament, the look of strained, listening puzzlement came over her soft, crumpled, eight. Sorry, came over her soft, crumpled face. What was her sin, still unrepented of, that in her old age God had sent her such affliction as this? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll pick this up again tomorrow.